What do we really have control over in our life? There's many things that we can't control. External things that happen to us, what people say, what school marks we get, even what our boss does, even what our family does at times. We can't control it. There is one thing that we can control, and that's our personal responsibility. We can, through personal responsibility, take charge of our life and what we do with it.
Welcome to share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to an On the Couch episode of the Share.Care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. And today, we're talking about personal responsibility. And personal responsibility is the first of the 10 principles at share.care. And if you go to the share.care website, I've got a little quote there that says, it is a painful thing to look at your own trouble and know that you yourself and no one else has made it. And that's from Sophocles. And it's quite difficult. I know from my perspective in my life, there was many times that I didn't take responsibility for things that I was doing with my life in my own self. And to add another quote to that, I think it was Einstein said, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is a definition of insanity. And there was many times in my life where I was simply not taking that responsibility, doing the same thing over and over, getting the same result and wondering why it was no different. And personal responsibility, I mean, what is that? What is personal responsibility? It's realizing that you have control, that you can take charge of how you react to things. And it comes about, I may have talked about this before. If you've heard this before, it's an interesting story, a sad story. If you're me, because I behaved badly. But I was at a friend's wedding and I was helping out at the wedding, and there was a car park out the front for the bride to pull up, and she was going to get out of the car and come into the church. Someone's gone and parked there. Now, it wasn't labeled. The person didn't know. And I've stormed over and said, "What the hell are you parking there for? Where's the bride going to park?" Now, this person with his partner, wife, girlfriend, not sure, had no idea that was where the bride was going to park. And whether they parked there incorrectly or not, it's one thing. It was how I reacted to that, and that was my choice. I mean, that's what I knew at the time, and that was what was available to me. But until I recognized that my reaction to a situation was my choice, then I couldn't do anything about it. And when I think back about that, I can still remember how that person looked, and they weren't happy. Of course not. I was yelling at them, and for they're going, well, in their mind, no doubt they're going, well, what are you yelling at? And that's the personal responsibility we're talking about in any situation. It might be the same token. You've got an exam to do, and you keep putting off doing study, and you keep putting off doing study, and you keep putting off doing study, and then you finally get there, and the last minute you're rushing around, and then something happens, and you're freaking out because you're going, oh, I've got to do all this study. And that's personal responsibility, recognizing that you could have done things differently, that in that moment you could do things differently. And that's how you can set things up. I do that with my son with his exam study, or with his study in general. We talk through it, and he understands how your mind works. If you repeat things early on, it sinks into your brain better. And we talked about it and said, okay, if you come home from school and you go through everything you did for the day, just read it, review it, um, and it shouldn't take too long, and it didn't. It took him about 15, 20 minutes to go through, just quickly go through the key things that they studied. And then he worked out if he did it at school during his free period, he wouldn't have to do it at home. He could go and do the things that he wanted. And that's him recognizing his personal responsibility. He's responsible for his marks, um, and takes those actions. And it makes a really big difference. Why is that important to do that? Well, think about it from that perspective. I mean, we've got a list here, and this is from the share.Care website. But responsibility is you are responsible for your own actions. Why? Well, it puts you in control. I mean, think about that. You're in control. You're going, well, I'm not, just an example is let's say someone's upset at you. The person in that example of me yelling at them. Let's reverse the situation. I mean, I've had people get upset at me. I've had in some board meetings that I've been in, where personal people make personal attacks, and I remember in those situations where those attacks come across to try and, I think they're done to distract you from what you're trying to address. And that's how I addressed it. Rather than going, how dare you say that about me? I actually just ignored it and went on about talking about the things that I wanted to talk about that I thought were relevant, rather than getting distracted by that. And I could have, you know, I could have lost control. And a lot of times when people do things like that, when they make a smart remark or something like that, usually it's for a reaction. And if you don't have control, if you're not responsible for your own actions, you'll just react in a way, and they will get that. Um, I have that all the time where with friends, and usually, I mean, that's, I think I'm not sure how the ladies react, but certainly I know when with the boys, we will, stir each other up all the time. It's like those, you've got the young ram butting heads all the time, and we do that. We'll sit there, and I still do that with friends now, and um, we'll butt heads all the time and just try and stir each other up to see if we can get a reaction. And part of that is learning that process. And the more different ways that we try and do that, the more skill we get at actually not reacting. And that way, we still remain in control. Or, when with my friends, and they'll stir me up a certain way, and I'll look at that and go, okay, yeah, and then I'll notice what that reaction is, and I can take that out into the wider world. And that's where in most situations, I don't, well, I don't remember a situation, certainly recently, where I've lost control in any situation. I mean, there's times when I've acted firmly, but that's always been in control. I've thought about it and thought, well, this is what I need to do. And so that's where, personal responsibility is one, it does put you in control. The other one is it increases your self-worth, um, and your security. Having it's interesting how your self-worth goes up when you choose how you're going to react. When you choose going, okay, how did I deal with this situation? How can I do this differently? How can I make this better? I know from my perspective, um, I can achieve things much quicker now because I don't look at it and go, if I'm dealing with an employee, for example, and then they're not um, doing what I want them to do, I'll rather than say, oh, they're a difficult employee, I look at it and say, well, how can I do things differently to get the result I want? Now, that approach makes a massive difference to your own self-worth and your own security in your ability, in your belief in yourself. You become very secure in the sense of you become very confident that you can deal with whatever situation comes about. I do that a lot with the continuous improvement program that I run. It's for organizations. It's a provides a massive amount of impact, but it's difficult. Yeah, I'm going to use the word difficult. I don't like the word difficult, but I'm going to use the word difficult. It takes some time for people to adopt it because it is different, but it works fantastically, and that's where, from my perspective, having that personal responsibility, I know when I implement this, a lot of people are not going to do it, and I initially they're not going to do it. And I take that my own personal responsibility. I don't jump up and down. I know this, and I think probably now because I've done it so many times and I know how it plays out, it doesn't bother me at all. It didn't bother me at the start either. I knew people wouldn't turn up, and they don't. And then over time they start turning up, and then the people that seem to be the most objecting to it actually become the biggest supporters. And that came about through my own personal responsibility because I rather than me jumping up and down and complaining about it, I just allowed it to flow in the natural progression that it was going to take. And that was my choice to do that. And it eventually got adopted. Partly, maybe, I think when I first did it, I understood how change works, where most of the time people don't. They kind of reject change and they avoid it, and you need to be persistent. And when it is adopted, it makes a big difference. And that's what leads to the other point, that you develop strength and courage. Because when you're responsible, you know that you can deal with those situations. Again, this comes back to control. You have control. So when a situation happens, um, then you can address it accordingly. You can adjust accordingly because things are different. Things change. People don't always behave the same way. You might, you know, you might get upset. There's many times now I rarely get upset, but in the past when I did, it was okay. That was I could say the other person upsets me, which is common. People will do that. Oh, they upset me. Well, if they've upset you, there's not much you can do about that. If you switch it the other way and say, well, I was upset by them, then you can go, well, and you take it a step further, I was upset by their behavior. So the person, I might like the person, or maybe I don't like them, doesn't matter. But I think I think most people have good intentions and are good people inside. They might just do some things that aren't so great. And so from that perspective, when you have that approach and you can split that out and say, okay, I'm reacting to them. I'm getting upset at them. They're not upsetting me. I'm getting upset. And if I have the underlying intention that they are good people, so I'm getting upset by what they're doing. They're good people. So what's really going on here? What can I work out? And it's amazing how you can create these wonderful relationships where you could have had an argument and a lot of tension, um, but by creating that, by having that um, self-responsibility, going, well, I'm upset. How do I react differently? How do I address this in a different way? And it creates a whole different dynamic with the people you deal with. So it develops your strength and courage. Um, Also, too, linking back to I've got here, you're no longer a self-subjugated victim. I think that's pretty harsh, but I, I agree with it in the sense of if you don't take responsibility, then you're at the mercy of what other people do. You can be easily manipulated. And that is true. There's a number of sources of power in the negotiation magic program that we have, which is deliberately set up to show you how to manipulate people that don't have this self-control. It's if they don't have it, And the underlying intention with that is that you're seeking a win-win outcome in the negotiation. Your intention is good. So, and that's where if someone doesn't have that self-control, you can use that power to manipulate a win-win outcome. You can also, when you're getting into the higher levels of negotiation, it's not so much about the just the win-win. It's also about maximizing the deal. That's where it becomes your advantage because you've got a rough idea of where the range of negotiation is, and if you're dealing with someone that isn't in control, then you can move them more towards the higher end of the deal that's more favorable to you. Which when you're playing in that field, it is about maximizing the deal. So that's where being a self-subjugated victim, it becomes really easy for someone to manipulate you if you don't take responsibility for your own actions. Because if you're not responsible for your actions, someone else can control you. They can pull your strings. It's as simple as that. There's no beating around the bush with that one. If you don't accept that you have control of yourself and you don't accept responsibility for your actions, then someone's going to manipulate you. That's pretty straightforward. And your ability to succeed is significantly increased. Well, that's very much the case as we were just talking about. When you are in control, then you can choose how you're going to react differently. So when you accept responsibility for your own actions, that puts you back in control. You can then adjust what you're doing to deal with things in a way that best serves you. Now, the presupposition there is that you know where you're going. And that's a really important thing, and we have a whole workshop on that as well, how to set up where you're going and what's your purpose, and we deal a lot with that because it's really important. If you don't know where you're going, again, it's very easy to get manipulated, and because you don't know if you're on track or not. How can you know where you're going, and or someone's not manipulating you if you don't have a clear direction as to where you're going? So that's where it's really important to understand how to maintain that control. And again, that's where personal responsibility comes in. You know where you're going, and because you choose, you're responsible for it. You're responsible for the direction in your life. And being responsible, taking responsibility, it's a really good feeling. It feels really good to know that no matter what happens, you can deal with it. Doesn't matter the worst that can come your way. And I've had that where I've had some really terrible situations, and knowing as much as it was in the mind initially, you get the notice and it's like, oh, okay, and then it's like, okay, I can deal with that. It might be an example, maybe you lose your job and you are responsible for your actions. You go, okay, I've lost my job, and what can I do now? I can go and get another job. Becomes that easy. Or you can, well, while you've got a job, you can say, okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm secure. I remember reading about Bill Gates when he started Microsoft. Apparently, he was concerned that the business wouldn't, it was very much at risk. Um, so they made a um, decree, if that's the right word. um, they made it part of their process that they would always keep a year's worth of salary as cash in the bank, because if there was a period where they needed that money, or where it wasn't going so well and the employees need to be paid, they always had that security there, which is an important thing to do. It's just to make sure that you've got that basis there. Um, and these are simple little principles to succeed. It's not that difficult. And it's a good feeling to know when you're moving along in that way that things are going quite smoothly, and you can deal with that. You can iron out the bumps because you're taking responsibility for it. It gives you a lot of power and control to be able to do that. And that it's the opposite. If you don't take responsibility for your action, it actually creates a sense of insecurity, and that's not really a great place to operate from. Insecurity leads to anxiety, worry, All sorts of physical illnesses stem from that. So that's where personal responsibility is an important thing to accept. That's why it's the first principle, although the principles are not really ordered, or they're listed in an order, but that's not an order. But personal responsibility is. And the thing to do, to how to do that, and how to take more personal responsibility in your life is not difficult. It's quite simple. And the first thing to do is to remind yourself that you're free to choose. It's always important to know that you are free to choose. It's one thing that you have complete control over is your mind. So you remind yourself to choose, and reminding yourself, you've got to remember that it's important to remember that your beliefs, they're just thought processes you've had over and over again. So that's where, if you remind yourself and you say to yourself, I have the power to choose, I have the power to choose, you'll eventually start believing it. Even if you're so far from believing it, eventually whatever thoughts you repeat become your reality. The other thing to do is to think about what's important for you. Is it important for you to be in control of your life? Is it important for you to not be easily manipulated by other people? Because when you start to put that in context, you go, hang on a minute, maybe I need to change how I'm doing things. I need to do things in a slightly different way because I don't want to be manipulated. I want to be in control. And that's where it becomes an ability to know. Well, it becomes important for you to know what's important for you. To use that way. I know that's not great English. English is my second language. I say that over and over again. But it's knowing what's important for you helps give you your direction going forward. The other one is to look for the solution to help you achieve what's important for you. And I find this all the time. It's quite common, and I find it's been written about umpteen amount of times, but many times people get so stuck on the problem that they're not thinking of the solution. And they're going, oh, this is terrible, this is terrible, why is this happening? And, this is a problem. Yeah, well, that's all fine that you've identified the problem, but quickly move on to the solution. What can we do? How can we move forward? Because as soon as you start doing that, the solution comes much quicker. Focusing on the problem doesn't help you find the solution. And taking responsibility, you can say, okay, this is the problem. Now, what's the solution? What can we do instead? But the presupposition to that is you know what's important to you. You can't find a solution if you don't know what's important to you. And then when you know what's important to you and you have the solution, simply do that. And then you'll get there. So that's a pretty simple formula to follow. It's to remind yourself that you are free to choose. Think about what's important for you. What do you want? What do you choose? Look for the solution to get there. And then do whatever you find as the solution. So that's where that pretty much sums up personal responsibility. It is really important. It is difficult to do initially if you're not used to it. Once you're used to it, you go, okay, I can manage it all the time, and it becomes really easy. I know from my perspective, my life is very easy because I take responsibility, and no matter what happens, I know that I can deal with it. And I will, I don't sit there and, I don't blame the other side or whatever is happening. So making, it's like, it all sucks. Nothing's bad for me. Whatever happens, I will be able to deal with it and move forward because I'm very clear on where I'm going and I'm looking for the solution. So as soon as something happens, my personal responsibility is that I can act, and I will act in a way that's going to move me forward as quickly as possible. So remember that from your perspective. As much as possible, take personal responsibility and move things forward as quickly as you can.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.